Hi there, crafty friends. It's Jaycee for a special Perfect Pairing episode. Mother's Day is the second Sunday in May in the United States. I wanted to give you a head start and share my top 10 old and new Altenew items for making Mother's Day cards, or whomever you share a motherly bond with. You can apply and adapt these techniques to other handmade notes for those you love just because. Let's jump right into the first card. For my first perfect pairing, I wanted to use the April 2021 Craft a Flower Cistus. I wanted to integrate the flower into the sentiment for this Mother's Day card. If you're part of the Craft a Flower subscription, I highly recommend adding the gradient cardstocks if you haven't already. They fit perfectly into the Mini Blossom die cutting machine platform from Altenew. I'll use the largest front-facing open bloom on my card, but instead of starting with the lightest rose quartz cardstock, I'll cut the most solid die layer in white cardstock. Then, following the layering guide for the Craft a Flower Cistus, I'll cut the first detail layer in rose quartz, the second detail layer in puffy heart, the petal detail in purple wine, and finally the pistil and stamen layer in a black cardstock. I try to leave the cardstock in the die if I can, but this is helpful for die layers that are not one piece, like the layer I cut from Puffy Heart. So as I assemble this flower, I'll show you what I mean. Sometimes layering and gluing down the layers are straightforward. I like to start from the base layers and work my way forward. Once I get to the puffy heart layer, since I left the cardstock in the die, I can do a dry fit first to get a familiar orientation. Then I can apply adhesive to the back. Then glue the cardstock to my first two layers of the cistus flower. Once I feel like I have permanent contact between the layers, I can pry off the die, and then my layers are perfectly oriented. And this is especially important for that small piece that isn't connected to the rest of the cardstock. You can do this for other Altenew layering floral dies as well. I know of a few current and possibly future Craft a Flower releases that dry fitting works really well for. Okay, anyway, I'll finish layering the last two layers of the cistus flower and set this aside to work on the leaves. For the leaves, I'll do the same color shift. In Coffee Break Gradient cardstock, I'll use Mocha for the most solid layer, Espresso for the detail layer, then black cardstock on the last layer. I cut and layered these cardstock pieces as shown on the Altenew packaging for a total of 3 leaves. I'll set these aside and bring in the third of my favorites list. This is Altenew Fine Alphabet die set. I consider this a crafty essential in my stash because of the modern yet timeless font. I really only need the letter M in this set because to spell the word mom, I'll replace the O with Craft a Flower Cistus flower we just made. I'll cut the letter M twice from white cardstock and the darkest cardstock in rose petal gradient cardstock, Cosmic Berry. I glued the white M on top of the Cosmic Berry M offset so that I had a shadow layer to the letter. I felt this complemented the layering of the flower. I have almost all the pieces I want for this card. I'll glue down the letters directly to the flower. I'm using my craft mat as a guide to make sure that my letters are in line horizontally. Before I glue down the flowers to my card front, I'll add black splatters to my background panel of spicy yogurt cardstock using jet black ink spray and a water brush. I love this giant roll of Altenew Instant Dimension foam tape because it is much softer than other foam tapes I've used and the adhesive is extra strong. I know this will fare better in the automated rollers of the Post. And while she's rippable, personally, I'd rather cut the foam tape. I'll finish this card with white heat embossed sentiments from a stamp set you'll see later on in this video. But for now, this is my first Mother's Day card using my first 4 favorites. That's Craft a Flower Cistus, Fine Alphabet Die Set, the Gradient Cardstocks, and the Instant Dimension Foam Tape. As always, the products I mention are linked in the description box. For my second card, I'll share 3 more old and new Altenew items to add to my top 10 list. I wanted to create an overflowing window of roses, again with an integrated sentiment. The best way I've found to integrate a sentiment into your bouquet is with a window greeting like this circled greetings love die. This die cuts a circled window with a scripty love word in the middle. I was fussing with ways to get this perfectly centered onto my white cardstock. I'll first align the die to the center of my A2 grid on my Altenew cutting mat. The cutting edge is facing the cutting mat. I have about a 1/2 inch setback on the left and right sides of the die for the portrait orientation, and a little more than 1 inch setback on the top and bottom. I'll apply a tape runner to the back of the die and touch the adhesive to remove a little bit of the tackiness. Then I'll use a piece of transparent acetate. You can use the Altenew cellophane that your stamps come in, cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I have a centering grid drawn on mine with a permanent marker. I'm aligning the transparency to the craft mat and pressing the die to the acetate so that my die sticks to the plastic. Now I can turn the whole die and transparency over. Slide some washi tape between the die and acetate, adhesive side facing us. Bring the transparency and die to a white panel cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 and match the 4 sides. Press down the washi tape and die. And remove the alignment acetate. Now, I am sure this die is as centered as I can get it without solely relying on visual estimates before running it through my die cutting machine. I'm going to trim off a 1/4 inch from each side of the white cardstock for a final circular window panel of 3 3/4 by 5 inches. I'll set this window aside and work on the next element to my card. The stamps I chose for this window bouquet are from Build a Flower Bellaroma Hybrid Tea Rose and the Altenew fan favorite Vintage Roses Layering Stamp Set and Die. I'll skip through the stamping portion of this card as I followed the layering guide on the stamp package using the Red Sunset and Seashore family of inks. And then I used the coordinating dies to cut the flowers and foliage. I did the same for the Vintage Roses stamp sets with the layering inks and die cutting. I have all my pieces of my arrangement laid out. However, for the background that sits behind the circled greetings window, I wanted something that offsets the white love die. Instead of making a complicated background, I adhered the peach gold washi tape to an A2 panel of white cardstock and burnished it with the Altenew bone folder. Then I trimmed off the excess so that I have a background panel that makes the sentiment stand out, but not overtake the flowers. Before I start gluing down the flowers, I'll foam mount the circled greetings love window and center it on top of my peach gold washi background. Next, I'll start arranging the flowers around the window. I'm using the same instant dimension foam tape and tucking in pieces of foliage and flowers around the die to help accentuate the script love in the center. I didn't use all the die cut pieces to make the arrangement, but I made sure to put the flowers in excess where I could so that the bouquet appears overflowing. I won't cover up the entire circled window. I'll leave a small area around the bottom right open for balance and for an additional sentiment. I gold heat embossed a U stamp from a scrap panel I had in my cardstock stash and added this banner to the right side of the love window so that the greeting reads "Love You." And finally, I added some gold sequins and gold pearl splatter from the 14 Metallic Watercolor Pan Set. This is the second card I made with 3 more of my favorites. Those are Build a Flower Bellaroma Hybrid Tea Rose, Vintage Roses Stamp and Die Set, and the circled Greetings Love Die. I'll finish off my top 10 list with my final card. If you love fun and interactive cards with a bit of assembly, then this one's for you. To start this card, I'm using the Paint a Flower Coral Sunset outline stamp set and the poured acrylic 6x6 paper pad. I'm going to use this sheet in the pattern paper pack and cut it to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And glue it to a white A2 panel of cardstock. That's one easy element to this card done. I'll set this aside and move on to the next portion. In my stamp positioning tool, I have a panel of vellum cut to 5.5 by 8.5 inches. I'll white heat emboss the main image of Paint a Flower Coral Sunset in the center of the vellum with a significant margin around the image. You'll see I'm using that same transparency as the previous card to get an idea of where I want this image to sit on my final card. After white heat embossing, I'll turn the vellum over so that the smooth side is toward us. To coordinate with the poured acrylic background, I'll use the alcohol markers from Altenew in the B set to very roughly color the flowers. I'm dabbing in color at the base of the petals and creating loose colored shadows with the shades of purple markers. Then I'm using the warm gray markers to completely fill in the leaves and stems. I want enough contrast so that when I lay this over the poured acrylic background, there is some distinction in the flowers and it doesn't look so flat. And as you can see, I trimmed down my vellum piece to 5.5 by 7 inches. We need the excess margin for this next step. I've flipped the vellum over again to the side we just colored, and I'm centering the image using the A2 portrait grid on my cutting mat. Then I will use my notes card base to trace the outline of the card onto the vellum. Now I will cut the corners of the vellum in this manner I show here, so that I have a 1/4 inch margin from the corner. I'll repeat that for the other 3 corners, and tape my vellum coloring side toward us onto my craft mat, following the A2 portrait pencil line I made earlier. Then I will overlay my notes card base with the glued acrylic poured panel on top, face down, so that the alcohol marker coloring and the poured acrylic panel are touching. The panel is also in line with the pencil marks on the vellum. Using a ruler and the Altenew Teflon bone folder, I'll score on the vellum along the bottom edge of the white cardstock. You may need to do a few passes to get a good line. I'll apply a liquid adhesive along the bottom 1/2 inch of the white cardstock. Wait for it to get slightly tacky, and fold the vellum up onto the white cardstock. So I'll repeat this for the other 2 longer sides of the cardstock. I'm scoring the vellum, applying a strip of liquid adhesive, and folding the vellum to create a pocket edge. The extra 1/4 inch margin on the corners helps give a cleaner fold on the corners, and you'll see I folded those as well on either side of the vellum. This is the same style of folding on your hardcover books to give a polished, reinforced edge. Now before we finish this vellum panel, I'm going to score the last side as normal and fold the cardstock. But before adding glue, I'm going to add in some sequins. This is the Satin Gold Sequin mix, and it's my favorite mix because of the matte texture on the sequins. Then I will close this vellum shaker pocket with liquid adhesive and fold down the last flap. To finish this card, I glued down this vellum shaker panel to my note card base. I'll go ahead and add my sentiment. I used the sentiment from Paint a Flower Coral Scent Set for this card, and also the very first card in this tutorial. I made a sentiment banner and stamped the sentiment in Midnight Violet from the shades of Purple family of inks. It matches the alcohol marker coloring. Before foam mounting the sentiment banner with the Instant Dimension foam tape, I added a bundle of Silky Lilac metallic thread from Altenew. Then I glued down a few of the threads with more of the satin gold sequins. I love making shaker cards in this way because there are no complicated die cut frames to stack, and you get a full shaker window without so much added thickness to your card. It kind of reminds me of the satisfaction of shaking a seed packet too. Anyway, for recap, I have my top 10 old and new Altenew favorites for Mother's Day cards listed in the description box. Hopefully this gives you enough time to get some new goodies shipped to you so that you can craft a beautiful handmade card. Don't forget to take advantage of Altenew's ongoing shipping promotions for US and international orders. Hey, thanks so much for watching this crafty tutorial. I have new Perfect Pairing episodes every second and fourth Sunday, so make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on exciting paper crafting content. If you've got any ideas on what you would like to see next, just drop me a comment. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you in the next Perfect Pairing.
Hello there! Did that video just spark your creativity? And do you want more project ideas and inspiration videos too? Well, if you do, please make sure that you subscribe to the Altenew YouTube channel. Also, make sure that you do click that notification bell so you don't miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye bye!